Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Dialogue. I'm your host, Umar Khalid. But we are going to talk about an issue that has been in the news not since now, not since a year, but since decades. In fact, since the independence of Pakistan. And of course, you must know what I'm going to talk about. That is Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir region. Although a lot of question marks do exist about the future or the past or the present of the region. But nevertheless, one should remember that it was in 1948 that India went to the United Nations Security Council itself to highlight that a plebiscite needs to be done in the region so that the people can decide their fate. But then, of course, things changed, the scenario, the regional scenario changed, and the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir were never given their due right to self-determination or to decide for themselves to what they want to do with their lives, with the region that they have been living in since generations. And of course, in 2019, India changed the whole demography of the region by abrogating certain laws, which include 370-35A, of course, that integrated the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir as part of India, which was never the case, which had never been the case even before India and Pakistan got independent. Nevertheless, Pakistan has been highlighting the issue of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir since time immemorial, but of late under the new government, it has been highlighting it even more so. Our Prime Minister Imran Khan has been talking about Islam, has been talking about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir at every forum, including especially the United Nations Security Council when he addressed it every year. Now, United Nations General Assembly, of course. Apart from that, our Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab has been addressing different fora, whether it be the OIC, whether it be the United Nations, whether it be all the other different fora, talking to different countries about what needs to be done and what hasn't been done as far as the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. Also, speaking of the United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres recently said, that is on Thursday, that he asked India and Pakistan, that of course are now nuclear armed neighbors, that they need to come together and seriously discuss their problems stemming from the unresolved Kashmir dispute, saying that his good offices were always available for mediation. Of course, this looks very good on paper or as a statement, but nevertheless, one should realize that despite the fact that even the United Nations has been talking about this very important issue since decades, there are more than 11 resolutions as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but India refuses to talk about it. Sometimes it says it's a unilateral matter, sometimes it says it's a bilateral matter, sometimes it says it is an internal matter. Now, to talk about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, what India has been perpetrating in the region, how Pakistan has been trying to highlight this issue, and what needs to be the present and the future of this very important region. We have been joined in the studios by Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab. He is a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us.
Thank you.
Dr. Saab, I kind of tried to give a little outline of what has been happening since 1948. But also, ladies and gentlemen, we have another guest online, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja, who joins us online. Dr. Sahiba, thank you very much to have joined us. It's a pleasure to have you on board for our show. Let's begin with you, Dr. Saab, then we'll go to Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahiba. Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab, I kind of, as I said in the beginning, kind of laid down a base of what Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the whole issue stands for. And of course, what India has been perpetrating in the region since decades, and how Pakistan has been trying to highlight the atrocities and of course, the people's right to self-determination, to decide for themselves what they want to do. Now, in the whole context of what has been happening since 2019, since the abrogation of Articles 370, 35A, and of course the international pressure on India as far as the human rights abuses in the region is concerned, what seems to be, in your point of view, the current state of mindset of the Indian government regarding Kashmir, and what will or could be done in the future by the Indians themselves before we go to other angles?
Right. So, thank you very much for your kind invitation, and I believe that this is very important question, and the issue is very important large, because this is not important for Pakistan and for this region, South Asian region, but this is also important for the international community as a whole. So, what I believe is that perhaps India is taking refuge in the idea of state sovereignty, and the whole idea that it's internal matter, and no other state is allowed to say anything or to question Indian atrocities in Kashmir. But I think that time has gone when this issue of sovereignty was taken as absolute. In today's world, and especially when it comes to the contemporary discourse of just war, we know that this whole idea of state sovereignty is contingent. And the whole argument behind this contingent thing is what is called as contractarian argument. And the contractarian argument, which is actually coined by liberal tradition, and I would like to quote a few scholars here, especially David Lobin, Michael Walzer, then David Rodden, people like these, very prominent, very well known scholars, they have actually coined this whole idea of contractarian argument, that states can enjoy their sovereignty till the moment they take care of the promise which they have made with their own citizens, and that is to protect their life and their subsistence. And if we apply this whole contractarian argument with India and their behavior with their own people.
But this whole contractarian argument has been put down the drain as far as India is concerned.
That's true. So I believe that this whole idea of sovereignty must be eroded when it comes to Kashmir, and international community must question India over its gross atrocities with Kashmiri people, not only with Kashmiri people but Muslims as a whole in India and other minorities.
Muslims as a whole in India, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahiba, Muslims as a whole in India, Muslims as a whole in the world, we see that the Muslim community across the world is more or less in doldrums or is kind of sidelined as far as the whole world politics is concerned. Now, if we kind of regionalize it and contextualize it in the whole scenario of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and what has been done on the international front, especially by Pakistan, by highlighting the issue despite the human rights abuses being made continuously by India, do you feel that the world understands, or if it understands, it wants to take action, or if it wants to take action, it only wants to take a limited action because it does not want to displease India?
See, I must appreciate this question. And if we see that what Pakistan promised Kashmiris, since day one, Pakistan has promised Kashmiris that Pakistan would extend political and diplomatic support for their legal cause and to execute the promise made to Kashmiris by the international community at the international platform or organization known as UNO. And this is the same promise India was agreed upon and promised again with India promised Kashmiris that their right to self-determination would be guarded and executed. But unfortunately, this is not the case. So for me, what is important, like if international community is listening or responding as per our desires, that is not important. What is important is that Pakistan keep struggling and keep the ball rolling at diplomatic and political fronts. It's our duty to make the plight of Kashmiris audible and visible to the international community. As one of the Kashmiri leaders once said, that Kashmir is the least reported conflict for the world, because the atrocities Indian army, Indian paramilitary forces, they are carrying out against the innocent Kashmiris, civilians, unarmed Kashmiris. Even 10% of those atrocities has not been communicated to the outer world in the same letter and spirit. So I feel that being a sovereign Muslim neighboring state, which is stakeholder in Kashmir conflict, it is the duty of Pakistanis, it is the duty of Pakistani government to keep highlighting the Kashmir issue.
And it has been highlighting that, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahab, not since now, but since quite some time. But this highlighting the whole issue has gained momentum in the last few years. Brigadier Retired Tipu Sultan Saab, senior analyst, also joins us online. Brigadier Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Brigadier Saab, I'd like to quote something from Antonio Guterres, who's the United Nations Secretary General, and he said, when he was replying to a question regarding the tension in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, he said it's essential that human rights are fully respected in all the territories that have been mentioned. And of course, he was referring to Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, when even the United Nations Secretary General talks about it, the other world leaders have been talking about it. It has been highlighted in the EU Parliament, it has been highlighted in the British House of Commons, and so on and so forth, at the OIC as well. Do you feel that this will remain relegated to a show of words and not a show of action?
Well, what I will tell you that if the world says that the Indian attitude in Kashmir and their atrocities and the way their security forces have been behaving and the way they have been denying the United Nations is unacceptable to the world, to the European Union, to the Americans, to the free world, to the democracies, then it is going to make a difference. Unfortunately, in the world of today, it is commerce, it is economics, it is military power, and you would realize that unless the country has a heavy investment from abroad, or it is an industrialized country, or it is a very, very threatening military power, which Pakistan is, of course. That is why the world is concerned. But if you are not an economic power and you are not churning out certain things that are exported, or if the West and the world is not interested in investing in your country, then it becomes a different ball game. So that is the larger picture. Look at Turkey, look at Malaysia, and the Muslim world. These are two countries whom the world takes seriously. And of course, there is Pakistan. The Arab world was there for oil reasons and all that. That has been destabilized. We have been telling the international community decades after decades. Imran Khan has renewed that trust through the United Nations, through European Union, through the Americans. But the Indians are not budging an inch. So what is the strategy? What is the way forward that we have to make a difference in Kashmir? That is the key. That is the key point on which Pakistan needs to ponder. We have a situation in Kashmir, we have a situation in India, and we have a situation in Pakistan whereby the Indians are accepting that they are fanning terrorism in Pakistan through Afghanistan, and it is their official policy. They have even known to have, put money into it through banking system, of which Pakistan has the evidence, which Pakistan has provided to the international community, and yet it is not making any difference. The farmers are protesting in India,
Exactly.
and the way that protest should have had the traction in the international media is missing.
It did not have any such
because
traction.
of
But
the
nevertheless,
fact
when something
that-
happens in the Muslim world, it gets all the traction that is required.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, kindly stay online with us, Brigadier Tipu Sultan Sahab. I'll go back to Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Sahab. You've heard a bit of what Brigadier Tipu Sultan had to say, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahiba had to say. I wanted to kind of highlight one of the angles of the whole issue, that is the United Nations. Because in fact, since 1948, this issue remains unresolved in the auspices of the United Nations, despite the number of resolutions that have been put forward by Pakistan. And of course, the first was put forward by India. Nevertheless, as we stand today, none of the resolutions have been put to fruition, so as to say. Do you feel that could or would happen at any day in the future? Or do you think this is just, these will always lie as resolutions and these will just keep on piling up?
Well, I think that we need to take another approach with respect to the issue of Kashmir. What I think is with respect to just war discourse, and here I would like to mention responsibility to protect, or R2P. That was actually a committee recommendation under the umbrella of United Nations General Assembly, which surfaced in 2001, and that actually advocated for humanitarian intervention where there are gross atrocities are being done by the states. So it demands certain states where there are gross atrocities, where there are mass atrocities against human beings, human rights, wherever in the world. So this specific R2P committee demands international community to take all necessary measures if a state fails to protect its own people, number one. Number two, if state is unwilling and if state is deliberately involved in mass atrocities, then humanitarian intervention must be carried out by international community itself. What I see in Indian case is that all peaceful options have been exhausted, number one.
Since long, in fact.
Since long, and it's more than 70 years now. So, because all peaceful options have been exhausted, and the international forum, of course, United Nations General Assembly, and you have already referred to 11 UN General Assembly resolution with respect to Kashmir dispute. All that has been done, I believe, and now we need to look at the last resort.
What is the last
and
resort?
last resort, I believe, is that we need to think about humanitarian intervention. And international community must think about humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian intervention is not necessarily military intervention, but it also it can also be by some other means.
I'll refer this question to Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahab. Humanitarian intervention, when we talk of this, we have seen that UNMOGIP is not allowed to have a base in India as we speak. We know that Amnesty International has been forced to close its offices and so on and so forth. Can there be any humanitarian intervention as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, as has been highlighted by Dr. Tasawwur?
Yes, definitely, because a countries which is committing atrocities, their willingness is not important for humanitarian intervention. But unfortunately, if we see the pattern of humanitarian intervention, whether it was in Africa or several other war-torn, conflict-ridden countries, we have seen that humanitarian intervention was only possible after the killings or mass genocides of millions of people. So unfortunately, this is a pattern. And when we say that Indian occupied government in Kashmir is not allowing the international human rights organizations, whether it is Amnesty International, whether it is UN MOGIP, to move freely and investigate the human rights violation in Kashmir, it means that India is trying to dehumanize the conflict. So they don't want world to see that how humans have been affected by Indian colonization, which is for
But
the
Dr. Asma
lust
Shakir
of
Khaja, you
power and
say India
occupied.
wants to dehumanize this whole issue. But how can one dehumanize an issue in a day of social media when everything that one does or one says can be seen in any corner of the world?
But Umar, we have to keep it in mind that for last almost 1 year, more than 1 year,
Yes,
internet
I know.
services are not available in India or in
That is true.
Kashmir.
I agree with you on that.
India is not allowing Kashmiris to use social media. They are not allowing Kashmiris to raise their voices against the atrocities. And whatever examples we have seen of Kashmiris talking about the conflict, they are in isolation. You must have remembered the interview of a doctor who only raised the issue that how the resources of hospitals in Kashmir are insufficient to deal with the patients of COVID-19. And what happened to that doctor? He was jailed for only for committing this crime of telling the truth or asking Indian government to help the Kashmiris. So this is the reality. There is, and if there would be any freedom of speech, then India would not be on the last edge of the international index of freedom of speech. So sorry, India has actually dehumanized the conflict. India is not allowing the outer world easily to come and see that humans are getting affected. And believe me, if this conflict is not being resolved, and if we see the Modi's approach or Modi government's aggressive posturing against vis-a-vis all minorities, the humans of the region and humans of international community will be affected by this aggressive fascist attitude of Indian government. So
The,
this is a
Brigadier Tipu
conflict
Sultan
which
Sahab,
is.
Brigadier Tipu Sultan Sahab, I'll continue the conversation that we have been having with both my other eminent guests. As far as the tensions between India and Pakistan, which of course center around the issue of India illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course we know that both the countries are nuclear nations now, and Antonio Guterres also very recently said that it is absolutely essential to have a de-escalation of the situation, namely in the line of control. Of course, he referred to the violation of the LOC by India and time and again. And of course, he said it's absolutely essential for both the countries to be able to come together and seriously discuss their problems. Brigadier Sahib, if you remember well, the first address to the nation by our Prime Minister Imran Khan Sahib, he said if India put 1 foot forward, we'll put 2 feet, we'll come 2 feet forward. I mean, we'll move 2 steps ahead as far as talking, as far as highlighting the issues and trying to sit together and come to a solution as far as the different issues that pertain to this region and of course India and Pakistan is concerned. Nevertheless, India has never bothered to kind of address these olive branches that Pakistan has been putting forward since the last few years. We understand the whole mentality, the whole philosophy of the RSS regime, of the BJP government. And we've talked to both of you, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahib, as well as you, Tipu Sultan Sahib, as far as the Indian mentality and what it wants to do, the hegemony that it wants to create in the region. But do you feel that under this whole coronavirus pandemic, the economic turmoil that India is going through, that it can continue to sustain itself in the situation that it has put itself in the last few years?
Well,
Tipu Sultan Sahib,
definitely,
can you hear us?
the Indians are unable to continue their strategy and their device between Ajit Doval, Amit Shah, and Narendra Modi. That is the foregone conclusion. But I will tell you, the extension of olive branch to the Indians is meaningless. You know, they adopted a policy of deceit in '48. They adopted a policy of deceit at the turn of the century when the Indians were getting very weak in Kashmir. And then 9/11 happened and Pakistan was under some sort of a pressure. Then they had an agreement through Musharraf and all that to save the Indians. And the Indians have been putting the freedom struggle in Kashmir into the terrorism basket very successfully. Then they did Pulwama and Balakot and all that stuff. So the chances of bilateral dialogue between India and Pakistan is a far cry as of now. And secondly, the international community has also proven to be ineffective in driving India to a point where they should seek reason. That is not a possibility. So what is it that is going to happen to tell the Indians that now that they have to seek reason, they have to go for the humanitarian reason, they have to get out of Kashmir, they have to give the right of self-determination to the Kashmiris. I will remind you that Nagorno-Karabakh happened in 88, 89, 92, 94. Nothing happened whatsoever. There have been UN resolutions. The Americans were not interested. Neither were the Russians interested. And the Armenians were occupying the territory from Azerbaijan. So when the country got stronger, the Russians moved in for the peace deal also and all that. So what is it that is going to put India untenable in Kashmir? We have a tailor-made situation in India where the farmers are protesting. We have a situation in Assam. We have a situation in Tripura, in India, in Punjab, in Haryana, in Rajasthan, everywhere. The Indians are unable to control that. So what strategy is Pakistan looking at? There is a huge gray area between war and peace. And the nations exploit that gray area and the opportunities available within that. You have to see where you have failed. Are you ready to change gear? Are you ready to change your strategy? The Indians have taken a strategic decision that they are going to annex Kashmir by amending their constitution, by continuing to have about 1 million security forces inside Kashmir and taking everything forcibly, deny Kashmiris the right of their land and putting the Indian non-Muslims over there, the Hindus and other people, and giving them the right to marry there, given them the rights to own land over there. So what does it mean? So, the Pakistan must sit down and think coolly that is it the diplomatic, moral, and political support that is going to take you to the solution or bring Indians to a negotiating table, or there is something else short of a full-blown war that Pakistan may adopt. We have
All
our,
right.
our opportunities. There are people who want to help their brethren in Kashmir, and the Indians are terming that as a terrorism movement. There is a difference between the freedom struggle and terrorism movement and terrorist activity inside another land. The United Nations Charter, the international law permits that if the people are in distress, the people are in distress, the nations, the bordering nations have a right to intervene through the means available to them. So I think the opportunity is right for Pakistan to sit down and think what should Pakistan do. I am sure there's a lot happening which we do not know. We do not have full information of the situation over there and what is happening. We are only knowing through media, through the social media clips and other things. But one thing we know for sure, Indians are not budging an inch. They are not listening to the international community. The international community is unable to force the Indians to stop what they are doing in Kashmir. So much so that the Arab world is also not interested. We have not been able to force Saudi Arabia for calling a conference on Kashmir. So that is the situation. So what is it that is going to gain strength to
All right.
cause
I'll ask you to kindly retain that thought, because I'm going to come back to the studio and ask the same question to Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab. Dr. Tasawwur Hussain, you've heard what Brigadier Tipu Sultan Saab said about exhausting all the other options as far as diplomatic connections or trying to put forward an olive branch is concerned. You talked about humanitarian intervention. Brigadier Saab goes a bit forward as far as other options are concerned, of course. I mean, a bit short of a full-blown war. Now, do you feel in the whole regional scenario that Pakistan is embroiled in at the moment, and the whole world is also embroiled in the moment, what are the options that Pakistan has as far as finding a solution to Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and for the millions of people that are stranded there since such a long time without even the basic amenities of life and of course the basic right to self-determination?
I think there are a couple of options which are there for every state, and those options are also there for Pakistan as well. The first thing is that you need to build up your military muscles in order to show that you are capable enough to defend yourself and your interests. That is what is called as hard power, and we have employed it in our history against India. And we know that it worked for some times and sometimes it didn't. But at this present moment, we are at par with India when it comes to deterrence. We are, Alhamdulillah, we are a nuclear weapon state. So to some extent, there is a balance of power which is very much there, something as a potent tool in international relations when it comes to relationship between states. The second important thing or tool in the threshold of a state's foreign policy is what called as economic transactions. So in that sphere, I think that when it comes to the relationship between India and Pakistan, it is not that potent, because there are certain enduring issues which are in front of economic relationships, or the way liberals would like to put it, complex interdependence. I think that the whole idea of complex interdependence is not very potent when it comes to Pakistan and India's relationship. The third important aspect or threshold in states' foreign policy is what called as persuasion, and this is what we can do. This is what we can do through social media. This is what we can do through good offices. Our good offices, our embassies,
but
here and
what
there.
we've been doing, Dr. Saab?
Yes, and the third thing which is important is we need to take good use of international institutions. We need to learn how to lobby. We need to place our people here and there where it matters, especially when it comes to lobbying, when it comes to pressure groups, when it comes to more sophisticated ways of diplomacy. So we need to learn contemporary, more sophisticated ways and avenues which are available for us in the realm of diplomacy. And third thing is what is called as in contemporary world, which is very relevant. It is called as narrative building, and it is through the construction of a narrative, which is through intelligible employment of language, and that intelligible employment of language takes into account universal norms, values, ethics, identity, ideology, which is actually or should be grounded in Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We need to play on that. We need to.
Haven't we been playing on that for quite some time now, Dr. Saab?
I think we did, but not the way we should have.
Okay.
So we should have done something in a more concrete manner, the way India does. You know, India has a soft corner, and this the Indian diplomacy in terms of its soft image is quite salable when it comes to international
I
community.
agree with you on that. The
So,
way they portray through their films, through their television
Yes.
series, through their documentaries, amazing India and
look,
so on
what
and so
they
forth.
did with, I agree with what Dr. Asma Saiba was saying, that actually they have, through this public diplomacy or propaganda, they have actually dehumanized Kashmiris in one way, and that is via dehumanizing Muslims by calling them terrorists. That is name calling, that is naming and shaming. Look, these are new ways to sell your narrative, to make your rhetoric more powerful, in order to achieve your foreign policy
All right.
objectives.
Achieving foreign policy objectives, I think, is the need of the hour, Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab, and I think I'll go back to my panel that is waiting for me online. Beginning with you, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Saab, when we come to lobbying or narrative building, as has been highlighted by Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab, and of course the different, in his point of view, lacunas that exist in our current policy as far as a more aggressive approach is concerned, as far as Pakistan's lobbying is concerned. When we come to India and what it has been doing, whether it be the EU Disinfo Lab report, whether it be the dossier that Pakistan has also projected through our DG ISPR, our foreign minister, as far as what India has been propagating internationally and nationally against Pakistan, I would call that terrorism against Pakistan. And in my point of view, India should be on the blacklist of the FATF, and Pakistan should be out since quite some time. What do you, in your point of view, ma'am, what do you feel needs to be done to more aggressively approach the narrative building of Pakistan, or the lobbying from the Pakistani side as far as the Kashmir issue is concerned?
Yeah, I would like to mention that narrative building is not a short-term approach, and it is not a product as well. It is a process, and it's a long-term approach. So if we believe that only doing few exercises we will be able to construct a narrative or deconstruct a narrative, but that is not possible. So one thing I would like to emphasize upon is echoing. Keep echoing your point of view. Pakistan should keep echoing Pakistan's support for Kashmiris and highlighting Indian atrocities or of in
But Dr.
Kashmir.
Saba, haven't we
So this
been
is
doing
really
that
important.
since quite some time, especially in the last few years?
Yeah, we need to make it in an effective manner. I would here like to mention the dossiers Pakistan presented to the international community. We need to build an evidence-based narrative. This narrative should not be based on emotionalism or just like on assumptions. That would have been more effective if that is being substantiated with by evidences, concrete factual evidences, and that is what put weight in our point of view, and that is why UN Secretary General has given such an important statement on Kashmir. So this is really important. And the second thing is that when Modi has definitely vis-a-vis all minorities, whether these are Muslims or these are Kashmiris or these are Sikhs, whenever they
Or
demand
Christians
their
even,
basic
ma'am?
human rights being Indian citizens, Indian government call them terrorists. They call them the people who are against the state. They
Hmm.
call them
And of course, the
traitors.
farmers'
So this
protest,
is
and now
how.
calling the Sikhs also, part of the same kind of a
Exactly.
movement
Now,
against India.
Sikhs only demanding their basic rights, they've been called a terrorist. So, Pakistan needs to challenge the enablers in international community, which enables an environment where India's propaganda has a weightage and has an influence. So, this is also very important that Pakistan should focus on the enablers which provide the desired space to Indian lies and Indian false claims in within the international community and media. And one
That
of
is
the
that
most
is so true,
important
Dr. Saiba, and I'd
enabler
like to
is.
kind of continue in the same vein with the Brigadier Retired Tipu Sultan Sahab as well. So when we talk of enablers of this disinformation against Pakistan, let's talk about the EU Disinfo Lab report, and that has heightened and highlighted what India has been doing. Of course, something that India has denied, but how can we not talk about it? How can we not talk about the role of the Srivastavs or the role of the ANI, the way it was propagating and forwarding all the information, the misinformation, the wrong information against Pakistan in India, and of course creating that narrative, as Dr. Sahib has also pointed out, against Pakistan. Now, in this whole context of narrative building and this whole context of lobbying, international lobbying, of course, I wanted to talk about the EU Disinfo Lab report, because I would like to join that with what is happening in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, with a total blackout of information stemming out of that region, and the 900,000 plus troops that are there, and the laws that have been abrogated, and the denial of basic human rights, and putting people under incarceration or under house arrest, or the women being raped, or the children being orphaned, and so on and so forth. I mean, I could go on with a whole list. Brigadier Saab, when you talk of options, military or otherwise, do you feel if Pakistan goes forward with a hardcore approach to find a solution to this region, vis-a-vis other incidents, as you pointed out, Nagorno-Karabakh and other incidents as well in the past, to which no other country put heed to until and unless the country itself, put its 2 feet forward and went towards a more hardcore solution. Do you feel the hardcore solution is the only option? And if that is the only option available to Pakistan, is it ready for the consequences?
No, Umar, you must understand that Kashmir is a long simmering problem, and forcing a solution anytime sooner may not be possible. So it depends what is a hardcore solution that you're looking for. Theoretically, what Dr. Saab has said will be all right, good in the books. But I agree uh, with Dr. Asma that narrative building takes a long time.
True. I agree
Perhaps
as well.
that long time is not available to us. You know, look at the situation in India. You could not think of somebody saying Pakistan Zindabad in New Delhi and Modi Murdabad.
Exactly.
You would not see another flag or red fort on top of that historic building over there. You would see the bodies of people being killed by the Indian forces wrapped in Pakistani flag and buried with national anthem, with Pakistani national anthem and all that. So there is something called environments. The environments are studied. It's a whole something, economic situation inside another country, the weather, the military power, and the world orientation, everything in it. Now, Pakistan has few options. Pakistan has a border with India. The Indians have a stake in Afghanistan, or they manufactured a stake against Pakistan. You have a negotiation going on in Doha. We have an influence over Afghanistan through certain quarters. The war is ending in Afghanistan. The Indians will be in a different situation over there. The Indians have a different situation in their Punjab and Haryana and Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh and Tripura and Assam and Kashmir. So the environments are changing. When the environments are changing, you have to look for option. It is not a hardcore solution. Please bear with me. I'm not asking you to collect Pakistan armed forces and have an onslaught across the LOC. No. So you have to create conditions inside that territory that it becomes untenable for the Indians to operate the way they are operating. Look what the Taliban had done in Afghanistan. They made the situation untenable for 32 countries. They made the situation untenable for the US. The Vietnamese made the situation untenable for them. The Indians will go on killing people. They will go on raping women. Will go on killing children. The graveyards will be full of that. And the people will be mourning in the streets of the Srinagar and Pulwama and Jammu and all that. Have you ever seen a funeral in Afghanistan to the likes of what is happening in Srinagar and everywhere? No.
No.
The situation is different. They adopt different strategies. Look what has happened to Palestine. What is happening in Lebanon and Syria and Afghanistan. This thing cannot continue. People will rise in numbers against the Modi's fascism, not only in Kashmir, but also in India. They will rise against them. There are already evidence of that. And when that happens, it is a conflict which is turning in our favor many aspects, and we need to recognize that, and we need to time that, we need to fuel that, we need to adopt a strategy which will mesmerize the Indian fascism in New Delhi, and there are chances that we have, and these chances must not go a begging.
All right. Thank you very much, Brigadier Retired Tipu Sultan Saab, to have joined us. It was a very interesting conversation that I had with you, and of course, we will be continuing to talk to you about this burning issue in the region, that is that of the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Coming back to the studios to Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab. Dr. Saab, when Brigadier Tipu Sultan Saab talks about options that Pakistan has or to adopt a certain strategy that forces India to change its attitude as far as the way it is perpetrating human rights abuses within India, especially in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Do you feel that this is a solution that is attainable in the short term, in the long term, or is it even attainable in your point of view?
I think that we have, to some extent, we have practiced it in the past, and it didn't work out. So when we try to cover something or we try to fix something, I don't want to use word proxies, but I think perhaps it won't work. If they make up their situation adverse for themselves, then of course it would have certain adverse effects on their own community, on their own national security situation, etc. But you know, in modern time period, states are very powerful, and India is a very powerful state, and it knows how to curb if there is any sort of separation, or if there is infiltration outside, or if there are proxies involved, maybe from cross border Afghanistan, etc. So I think that in the long term it won't work, because it didn't work.
What will work then?
I again emphasize on one thing, that we need to utilize the sense which is prevalent in civilized world, and that is to use multi-pronged strategy and have some patience. We need to be more sophisticated in terms of our foreign policy threshold. We need to coin number of options. We need to put into practice number of options in terms of the Kashmir issue in order to resolve it. And for that matter, we need to prepare on the grounds which I have already referred to, that there are certain options for all states, and they are very enduring. Be it the case of United States of America. Look what America did in its history when it comes to its foreign policy. It has coined all these options, sometimes one by one and sometimes simultaneously. Be it the case of Cold War, So they dealt with a very mighty competitor, that was Russia, and we need to learn how United States of America dealt with communism, how it dealt with Russia. And I think that history has a lot to tell, and it has a lot to share with us if we want to learn.
All right.
So we need to learn a
All
lot
right.
about history.
We need to learn a lot from history, and I think lessons need to be learned from past experiences as far as the resolution of issues that resemble that of Indian illegally
Yes.
occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahiba, coming back to you and of course wrapping up this whole very important discussion on the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, I'd like to understand the current US perspective on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I remember very well that both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris talked about the human rights abuses in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir while they were campaigning. Now that they have taken their offices and taken their oath as the President and the Vice President of the United States of America, and of course when we know what is happening to Dr. Ashik Hussain Fakhtu, the longest serving political prisoner in the region, Asian Drabi, Sayyid Ali Gilani, Shabir Ahmed Shah, Ashraf Saharai, Dr. Fayaz, Mir Waiz Umar Farooq, Yasin Malik, Musarat Alam Bhatt, and so on and so forth, as far as the leaders in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are concerned. Humanitarian abuses, humanitarian abuse of the basic rights of the people of a certain region that are being curtailed not since now but since quite some time. Do you feel, in your point of view, I'd like your very candid answer on that, that the United States of America could put economic relations or nuclear relations with India on the side and heighten and highlight what is happening as far as human rights abuses in the region is concerned?
See, we should not have high hopes from the new government in place in the United States, because government has its own structure, and as you yourself pointed out, economic relations between US and India and the bilateral relations between China and the USA, they would determine that how US would respond and try to resolve Kashmir conflict. But we have to understand that when we talk about human rights violation, then colonizing an area, a region, and don't give the right of self determination to the indigenous people, the locals, is itself the biggest human rights violation. And if we view this situation from this perspective, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they both have admitted that the basic human rights are not being protected in Kashmir for Kashmiris, and they have been colonized by Indian colonial power. So this is what we need to understand. But definitely, I see that the US would try to put diplomatic pressure on India, and would be a silent pressure group to convince India to resolve this Kashmir dispute, because this is, we really need to understand that if any aggression or any violent clash stems from Kashmir, or Kashmir causes another war between Pakistan and India, that would be destabilizing factor for the whole international security paradigm. And that destabilization maybe would not be in the favor of the biggest stakeholder in international status quo, because currently international status quo is in the favor of the USA. And maybe Modi's aggressive fascist policies may endanger international peace and security, and help other forces to change the dynamics of that status quo. We should not
All right. Thank
forget
you very much,
that
Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahiba, to have given us a very, of course, long and detailed perspective on what has been done, what needs to be done in the region, and of course, the whole dynamics of regional politics as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. Thank you so very much to have joined us, ma'am. And of course, we look forward to hear more from you on this very important topic. And thank you very much, Dr. Tasawwur Hussain Saab, as well, to have joined us in the studios and to have talked about this burning issue. I mean, I want to say it's a burning issue because in fact it is, and I really hope that a solution comes out of it, that some kind of economic pressure is put on India so that it kind of at least backs down on some of the issues, at least not if others human rights abuses that it is perpetrating. And maybe in the years, ladies and gentlemen, that we have in front of us, we might see a plebiscite and the right to self-determination of the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir finally coming to fruition. We can only hope and pray. And of course, Pakistan will continue to put forward its efforts aggressively and otherwise as far as highlighting this issue is concerned, diplomatically, politically, and morally. With that, we come to an end of today's dialogue. Take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend. Allah Hafiz.